End of the line for the Prime Minister. Not quite. He will be Prime Minister for a little while longer, but who should replace him on a long-term basis? We'll discuss that later. Meanwhile, completely different story and a very important one. 70 years ago, Britain became the third nation in the world to develop and test nuclear bombs. During that programme of testing, in 1957, the first British hydrogen bombs were detonated during something called Operation Grapple at Malden Island and Christmas Island in the Pacific Ocean. So we're going back to the 50s here, and you can hear the Pathé news reports.
From the newly constructed runway on Christmas Island, a camera plane also took off to film this same blast. And once again we watch the fireball as it forms, proclaiming that Britain joins the United States and Russia as a hydrogen bomb power. This test was the first in a series that will include devices as powerful as those exploded by any nation. The first explosion was made in ideal weather conditions, and it is reported that there was a minimum of radioactive fallout.
Many of those who were in the British Armed Forces and who witnessed the nuclear tests say that they've gone on to have serious health issues because of the material that they were exposed to. Nothing to do with that. News report saying there was a minimum of fallout. Actually, the scale of it is enormous. 1,500 veterans. 155,000 of their descendants experienced higher rates of cancer, fertility problems, miscarriage, congenital birth defects, and so on. And it might be somebody in your family who's been affected, or maybe a grandfather, grandmother. You've experienced unexplained health problems because you were there in the 50s, seeing those nuclear explosions with very little protection. You can get in touch. vine@bbc.co.uk is the email for you. Just enclose your phone number, please, so we can get back to you. Text us on 88291. We're going to speak in a moment to Susie Boniface, journalist who's been covering this story for 20 years and is hugely committed to the cause of these veterans. But we're going to speak to a veteran himself first. John Morris witnessed 4 nuclear bombs. You're in our Salford studio, John. Hello.
Hello there.
1957 it was.
56 to 58, I was basically on Christmas Island. I did 16 months. Saw, like you say, 4 bombs. And the last one was 20 miles away.
Describe then the first time you saw one of them go off. What was it like?
If I said I think I saw the end of the world, it wouldn't be an exaggeration. I was 19 then when the bomb 20 miles away was detonated. You've got to recall, I was a conscript. I did national service, and you did what you were told to do. I had no idea I was going on to Christmas Island. I just arrived. And we'd not a clue that these tests were going to take place. When the bomb went off, we could see the plane actually in the sky doing its figure of 8 so that it could drop it at its top and escape. We were then ordered to sit down with our backs to the explosion. Mm-hmm. I had sunglasses on, a pair of shorts and a shirt. That was my clothing. And the Army or MOD considered that was sufficient.
And I can't believe that, John, that you were only 20 miles away. I would have thought you would have been in the blast zone if you were at that distance.
Well, as I said, we did not have a clue where we were or what we were about to witness. But when the blast went off, Jeremy, it was so horrendous. It's very, very difficult to explain. I had my hands over my eyes, and I literally, when the bomb exploded, the light from that, I could see literally right through my hands. I could see all my bones, everything. It was unbelievable, very difficult to explain. And then we got the heat wave. Now, I don't know if people listening open an oven door when they've been cooking something very hot. You immediately step back and think, my God, that's hot. Mm-hmm. Well, if I said to you, I arched my back from the heat, I felt that my body and blood was boiling. It was immense. It has been said that the explosion at that time was like sitting 20 miles from the core of the sun. I don't think anybody in their right mind would sit 20 miles away with a pair of shorts, a shirt on, from the sun. And that's what it was. And then we were allowed to stand up and look at, well, weren't allowed, we were ordered to stand up and look at the blast. It was brilliant, to be truthful. It was unbelievable. And we could see the shock wave. We didn't realise it was a shock wave coming towards us. And it blew people off their feet.
Wow, it's incredible. I mean, you saw 4, you saw 5, was it?
No, I saw 4. I didn't see 4. I was in the area where 4 took place.
Okay.
The first 3, one was dropped from a balloon, but we felt the aftermath 2 or 3 days later on the island when you noticed the sea levels, for a start, grew higher. There was one drop from a tower, and we'd built a village on the tower, on this particular atoll. We went back to look at it, and we couldn't find it. It had disappeared. And the third one was dropped just outside Australia, and that was dropped from a plane.
And do you believe that your health has been affected in the years since?
There is, at the beginning, I didn't pay much attention to what was going on with myself. I, at 26, had pernicious anemia. But prior to that, I'd had a son, our first child, and he died at 4 months. As people have said many times, myself and my wife, we found him dead in his cot one morning. We took him to hospital. Whilst we were in hospital, the police came and arrested us on a possible murder charge. 2 days later, the charges were all dropped. They said it was a cot death. Then I got the death certificate so that we could bury him, and it said he had bronchial pneumonia. Well, Jeremy, I can honestly tell you, if he got bronchial pneumonia when we put him to bed, I've got 3 heads. There was absolutely nothing wrong with him as far as we knew.
I tell you, let me just bring in Susie Boniface here, who's the journalist who's campaigned, because that story, a terribly sad story of the cot death of John's son, I know you've heard so many that are similar.
Yeah, it's been nothing but, I mean, John's wonderful at telling his story, and the thing that always blows me away is that test veterans who have been through horrible experiences in their lives are happy to relive them and retell them to people, to me and to you and to others, in order to try to get justice and for people to remember it, because we do seem to have forgotten what happened after the war. You know, our history in this country goes Second World War, Beatles, Thatcher, present day, and that the stuff in between has been forgotten. But the fact that Vladimir Putin is not currently threatening us in this country, despite our support for Ukraine, is because we have the continuously at sea nuclear deterrent, which is down to men like John. Whether you approve of nuclear weapons or not, what they did has kept us safe for 70 years. The anniversary for the first bomb test is on October the 3rd, and the reason the Queen's Platinum Jubilee is marking 7 decades of safety and security is because of these men, and they've been utterly and horrifically forgotten and mistreated. John waited 60 years to get the full autopsy on Stephen's death, and then he found out that the bronchial pneumonia that they had claimed on the death certificate Stephen may have died from could actually have been down to deformation of his lungs. They never did a swab test at the time to prove bronchial pneumonia, and so and there are other deaths as well that have huge question marks over them.
So John, you've just hit a brick wall, have you, and your fellow soldiers as well, where you try to say, look, come on, accept that this must be linked.
I've often argued this fact for 60 years. The more I talk to veterans, like I say at the beginning, when I was 26, I had no people that I could refer to. The army completely blanked us. The people that were there didn't communicate with each other, and it was only as the advent of phones became more popular that we suddenly became an organisation that started to collate information, and that information suddenly made me realise that there were so many people in a similar boat to me. I am not a lone wolf. There are hundreds of us. Well, there was. I mean, there's not very many of us left living. But we were subjected, as I believe, as guinea pigs. I was 18, I was fit as a butcher's dog, and I was chosen because of that fact. And on Christmas Island, there were 3,000 of us originally that set the movement forward. And all of us were, I believe, apart from the officers and senior men, the majority of us were under 30.
So, Susie, you went in to see the Prime Minister in somewhat different times for Mr. Johnson. And I know that he was receptive to this.
Yes, well, he was obviously, it was a few weeks ago now, and he was quite in need of a good headline at the time. Don't know how he feels about those now. But what John says there about being guinea pigs and being experimented upon, we've managed to establish this over the years with the Mirror's reporting on this. We've got evidence of a ship, HMS Diana, being ordered to sail twice through fallout in order to test the effect on the crew, most of whom have now died, most of them from tumours of some sort. We know aircrew were ordered through the fallout on sampling missions and were not given long-term follow-ups, and that they've got lots of birth defects in their children. We know decontamination crews had no equipment. We know that some of the men were tested for blood and urine analysis, which now seems to have been lost, in quote marks. So we know that there's stuff going on, and we went to see that. We had a campaign to say, look, we need to see the Prime Minister. We won a medal review back in 2018, which seems like a lifetime ago now, but the medal committee ruled against the test veterans 3 times on the grounds there was no risk or rigour shown in the application about their service. And we said, this is disgusting. Of course there's a risk to it. You know, the difference where John was 20 miles away from the bomb, that's the same distance as between sort of, say, Birmingham and about Stratford. And can you imagine if a 3 megaton device, that's 112 times more powerful than the ones which destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if one of those went off in Stratford-upon-Avon, do you think people in Birmingham would be happy to sit there? And sit there for 16 months, as John did, eating the food, eating the fish, drinking the water, playing football on the irradiated sand? Of course not. So we went to see him.
I've got a couple of comments which you'll be interested in, both of you, I think. Amanda emails and says, my dad was on Christmas Island in 1957. I'm wondering whether you might have known Amanda's dad, John. She says he told me horror stories of when the bomb went off. They were told to sit with their backs to the blast, with their hands over their eyes. He said, just like you've said, John, he could see every bone in his hands. It was an experience that ruined my dad's life. He developed Crohn's disease and then was institutionalized after falling ill with depression. As I write this, I'm sobbing because he died 4 years ago and he will never get the recognition he and all the other men deserve. And one more, Sarah Denny Jones in Shropshire says, my dad, John, was based on Christmas Island in 1963 as part of this Operation Grapple. He never qualified for any kind of military pension. He's terminally ill now. He's suffered poor health for many years, and the likelihood is he will never be compensated for the time he spent serving his country.
Well, Sarah, if he was part of Operation Dominic, which was happening in 1963, and there would have been clean-ups after that, that was an American operation that we used British servicemen in, and the Americans do compensate our troops who are in their tests.
Really?
So it's called the RECA programme, and, you know, contact us after the show and we can put you in touch. If he's ill with a number of radiogenic conditions, the Americans will compensate him, although our government doesn't.
Let me play, on that note, a statement we've been given from the Ministry of Defence.
We are grateful to all service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme and contributed to keeping our nation secure. The protection, health and welfare of those involved was a vital consideration, as documented by the detailed safety measures and radiobiological monitoring that took place during the operation. The Prime Minister met with several nuclear test veterans recently and has asked ministers to explore how their dedication can be recognised. We remain committed to considering any new evidence.
Is that a bit of bluster, do you think, Susie?
I've had lots of statements out of the MOD over the years which don't quite make sense. In terms of the extensive monitoring they had of the men, we know from official government figures that at Operation Hurricane, the first test in 1952, about 90-odd% of the men had a radiation dose measuring badge. By Operation Grapple, the big one in 1958, It was 8%. Overall, only a quarter of the men were ever monitored for radiation. They simply don't know how many were radiated or not. And
Did you see if John, were you monitored or not?
No, definitely it wasn't monitored. And like I said earlier, I've had pernicious anemia since I was 26. I've had cancer. I've got a bone marrow deficiency. The MOD have never, ever thought about making contact. They are full of bluster and full of nothing. It's just hot air.
Well, maybe, I don't know, but here's Boris Johnson in his last days. Maybe his last days in office, Susie, he'll suddenly say, let's do this.
Well, he was very taken aback in our meeting, and John was there and went in and thumped the table in the Prime Minister's parliamentary office, which was quite a moment, telling him what to do. And he was taken aback about all of this and said he was going to look into it. And I genuinely think that the Prime Minister does want to do something about this. Now, whether you think he's going to be able to or not, as caretaker Prime Minister, he would have the right to undertake a discretionary, to do something as an urgent matter. Because this anniversary is coming up, he could, because there is massive cross-party support from his own backbenches and Labour, and they're urging him to do this, he could order a medal in time for that anniversary this October. We're also asking him for a moment of national acknowledgement, of national wider recognition in terms of a ceremony at Westminster Abbey to mark Operation Hurricane and what we're calling the Plutonium Jubilee, which is this October.
Thank you very much, Susie Boniface, journalist who's been campaigning, covering on this amazing story for 20 years. A lot of people ignoring it, of course. And John Morris, thank you as well, veteran who witnessed 4 nuclear bombs in 1957 and believes he has many health problems as a result. Really given us pause for thought. What an amazing gentleman we had on, John Morris. He saw 4 nuclear bombs in 1957. His description of saying, they say, right, turn your backs to it and cover your eyes with your hands. Can you imagine? And you're 20 miles from the blast, and it's more powerful than the bomb that hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And all they want is just for someone to say, your health problems are our fault. And no one will ever say it. David texts and says, my uncle Jack died riddled with cancer 5 years ago. He was a veteran of Christmas Island. His quality of life was poor for years. Still no apology. I'm a serving member of the forces, but I feel bitter about this. Sue in Hartlepool, you're thinking about your uncle today.
Yes, Jeremy. Hi.
What was his name, if I may ask?
Ted Kinnersley.
Okay, and did he not have a long and healthy life?
No, he actually died of a heart attack at 52.
Okay, very young. Where was he, on Christmas Island?
He was, and exactly the same as what John said. Turn your back to it and cover your eyes, and that's it, nothing. And then he went on to have Paul, his son, who had learning difficulties, his firstborn.
Yeah.
Shocking.
And it's always difficult, isn't it, to say this, that and the other happened because of the nuclear explosion. But he was certain, was he?
Can't be a coincidence, can it?
I don't know. We know that large doses of radiation cause cancer and all of that. So, did he? What was it? Did he ever describe what it was like to be on that island?
He didn't. There is photographs of a mushroom. Yeah. That's what it was, a big mushroom. Yeah.
Really? So does he take photos himself of it?
No, obviously. What others have took. Yeah. I don't know who he was with. I don't know any. But a chap who we did go in the army with, who lived in Hartlepool, it happened to his firstborn as well.
Oh, dear. Well, like John, who had Stephen, and he died in his cot, and... Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you think, what needs to happen? Because a lot of people have died now. So what should happen now?
Well, an apology would be nice, wouldn't it?
Thank you, Sue. Gila Tatham in Cornwall says, my uncle was in the Navy. He's no longer with us, but he left a Polaroid photograph of himself and his colleagues with no shirts on, with the mushroom explosion in the near background on Christmas Island. And I look at the photo often, says Gila, and I am in despair, dismay, when I look at it. Laura's in Essex. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Hello. Your father-in-law was there as well.
He was, yeah. He was there. He was in the catering, RAF catering, and he was on Christmas Island whilst they were testing. So, yeah, he was there and he experienced it.
The description from John of that explosion and how the light was so bright you could see through your hands, see the bones in your hands. It must have been, whatever they were exposed to, must have been so powerful.
It must have been horrific. And the thing was that as a family, no one ever knew the complications that have gone through the family. No one knows whether that is linked to that or not, but we all have our suspicions. And my father-in-law had several complicated medical conditions that you just couldn't imagine weren't linked.
And then your husband is born, obviously your father-in-law is your husband's father, right? Does your husband have issues as well?
My husband died when he was 48.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
That was 9 years ago. So, but when my father-in-law came back from Christmas Island, he had perfect skin before he went. When he came back, he was full of boils and cysts and had to be treated in Harley Street. Subsequently, my husband had quite mild acne, but both my children have got it. My husband had cysts that he had a couple removed. My son has now had 4 operations and lots of scars because of horrific cysts that just erupt. Now, all of that together just seems really strange that for someone who never had any blemishes before he went to Christmas Island, and now congenitally 3 generations have had that kind of thing, as well as my husband passing away at 48.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's so sad. Laura, thank you very much for calling. John in Glasgow emails, my dad was on Christmas Island during the testing that you're talking about in the 50s. He told my mum he and his colleagues had to wear sunglasses and turn their backs to the explosion. He died of cancer in 1970, age 43. Fiona emails, my father was involved in the tests and was serving on HMS Diana. This is the one where Susie was saying they deliberately took the ship through the fallout wave to see the effect. Fiona says, unfortunately, my father died in 1981 at the age of 45. He didn't discuss being involved in the tests, but I remember him saying the noise was like the devil cracking his whip. These men have fought for so long to get the recognition they deserve.